God has told me to tell you that the things which you have claimed that God had said to you, He had never spoken. Just say it. The reason I even mention it is because it has become fashionable among church people to talk about God speaking to them. When people say this, they mean that God speaks to them directly. They hear God's voice in their heads. It has become a sort of an epidemic where everybody now is speaking in the name of God, overhearing God's voice echoing in the chambers of their minds. I've been listening to these claims for quite a few years now. I have had people who have told me that God had told them which stores to shop at, which cars to buy. God has told them where they ought to park or not to park. There were people who said that God has clearly spoken to them, telling them to leave a church where they have run into conflict with others, instead of solving that conflict biblically. I've had men who have come and said that God has told them to leave their marriage because they have met this other person that is better suited for them. It seems that everyone around us these days is hearing God speak to them directly. It is hard not to wonder how it is that we've come to this place where folks claim that God speaks to them directly rather than speaking to them from the Bible. And I think that has to do with the nature of Bible itself. The text of the Bible is distant from us by some 20 centuries. And then when you pick up the Bible, you discover that among all the literary genres, all the stories, all the words, history, geography, culture, it's a hard book to understand. We've been told time and again that understanding God is supposed to be easy. It's sort of an odd claim when you think that here is a God of the universe in all His complexity, perfection, that we would think that He'd be kind of easy to comprehend. But somewhere in there we've become convinced that it ought to be easy, so when we came to the Bible we found it hard. Beyond that, I think that from one Sunday to the next we were listening to these people who were speaking from the Bible, and what they said we found boring, tedious. Sunday after Sunday they were waxing eloquently about the same old stories we have heard from Sunday school. Very little insight, very little excitement. So somewhere in the course of the church's story, we came to the place where we got bored with the Bible. And then on the other side of that equation, we got enamored with novelty. We love the latest news. Whatever's latest is best. And so we long for someone to speak to us, some fresh words, something new, something that would capture our imagination. So there was a cast of men and women that have emerged from the church who have started calling themselves apostles and prophets. They would tell you that we're all apostles, except that when they used the word apostle, what they meant by that was that they heard directly from God, just like apostles heard Jesus speak to them. So we're all apostles, except they were, slightly different. We're all sent out, but, they got it directly from God. And then there were people who came to claim to be prophets. They actually insisted that God speaks to them directly. And their voice became like the novelty in the marketplace of religious ideas. Because suddenly, when you made it to church on a Sunday, you were overhearing somebody telling you what God whispered in his or her ear the night before. That's so much more exciting than that old stuff from the Bible. So those churches of apostles, of prophets, have mushroomed around the world. That's because we're tired of the old Bible. We are all excited about the newest news that comes our way through the apostles and the prophets. I also think there's another reason why speaking for God by claiming that God has just said something to you directly has come in vogue. And that's because when you say that God has told you, you play a trump card in a conversation. Now, who's going to argue with God? And if God had said it to you, that always puts me on the defensive, thinking, injecting that uncertainty whether God actually said it or didn't say it. For instance, if somebody comes and says, God has cursed the woman in the garden. Well, you can go into the biblical text, back to the 3rd chapter of Genesis, and there it says that God cursed the snake. God cursed the ground from which man was made. But God never curses the woman. It's there in black and white. There's no curse. Just the consequences of her choices. You can point to that and say, God never cursed the woman. But when there is no black and white and no text to consult, when you say God has told you, well, how am I to argue with that? So for you and for me to claim that God had spoken to us directly is to put ourselves beyond the reach of any scrutiny, any biblical evaluation. Who's to argue with God? But then it's hard not to wonder why it is that God bothered to reveal himself in scriptures, in what we call the Bible. After all, the Bible has been written over a span of some 1,500 years, some 40 authors, on 3 continents, 3 languages. What more is that many of the people who have put their hand to the biblical script have not ended well. They paid a price for adding their name to the list of authors. Jesus says that God's people have killed all their prophets. Some of these prophets have their books firmly embedded in what we call the Bible. So you not only have the problem of revelation. Why did God bother to go through the whole process? If he could have just whispered in your ear today. Then you've got the whole problem of inscripturing the text, on preserving it over all these centuries. The Bible is the most reviled book on the planet. For generations, people wanted to erase it from human memory. And yet God preserved it. You can't help to wonder, why does the God bother to go through all this if could have just could have said it to you last night. Could be whispering it today. Could be speaking to everybody directly. And there is even more weighty question. If God has given us all the truth that we need for relationship with him for here and now and for all eternity, what else do we need God to say so that we could truly live for him here and now? What's missing? It all boils down to the question, can God speak to you and me directly? And the answer is, of course he can. But then you can't get away from the question, why would he bother to waste his breath to say something new to us when we have not bothered to listen to what he said to us already in that old book that we call the Bible?